Hello there, good evening, and welcome. Welcome to a new octave, a new project, a new beginning. We will be reading this wonderful memoir and biography of Mr. Gurdjieff from Thomas and Olga de Hartmann with the title Our Life with Mr. Gurdjieff. In my opinion, is one of the best memoirs that you can read to learn about Gurdjieff, the man. Thomas de Hartmann was the composer who worked closely with Gurdjieff to create the beautiful piano music, and Olga de Hartmann worked alongside Mr. Gurdjieff very closely in sort of a secretarial form, as she was his secretary for some years, I believe. And I'm very much looking forward to sharing this with you. It's a nice compliment, this nice memoir, and more from the heart than Maurice Nicol's commentaries, which may be a bit more intellectual, and In Search of the Miraculous that I'm uploading, which is also intellectual. This is a lovely compliment to those texts, but of course you want a well-rounded view and perspective on Gurdjieff the man, the ideas, and also his legacy. And hello there, Valdemar. Says greetings from planet Poland. Couldn't refuse. Well, it's lovely to see you, Valdemar, to be back connected in real time across the interwebs. And anyone else watching and listening, do say hello so I know that you're there and can connect astrally. But this evening we will read the introductory material. There is several blurbs, a introductory note by Jacob Needleman, some short biographical information about Gurdjieff, Thomas de Hartmann and Olga de Hartmann, and then the first chapter is about their life in St. Petersburg before meeting Mr. Gurdjieff, and so we'll be working through all of that. And then tomorrow come back for some more, and then who knows where we'll go from there. But if you're looking forward to this, all of the In Search of the Miraculous and Fourth Way uploads to come, of course working through Maurice Nicol's psychological commentaries. If all that is of interest to you, please consider liking the video, subscribe to the channel, share the show on your social media, it helps. And if you like the Gurdjieff material, there's many other texts on the app, the book club app. Fritz Peters, Idiots in Paris, Beelzebub's Tales. The link's in the description. Head over there, have a look, and I'm sure you'll find something wonderful to listen to. But I'll just read the blurb to begin with, and we'll get well acquainted and introduced to this beautiful book. This much loved and long out of print book will be of great value to a new generation of readers. Here they will find an unsurpassed personal portrait of G.I. Gurdjieff, under whose leadership a harrowing escape from war-torn Russia becomes conditions for transmitting the work of consciousness. In the years that followed, his teaching has taken root in the West and now guides thousands of men and women throughout the world in their search for the experience of truth. And that's from Jacob Needleman. And further, the de Hartmann's classic book, now in its definitive edition, is an original tale and in the beginning. It records with a marvellous grasp of circumstance, character and detail the emergence of the Gurdjieff teaching from the years of the Russian Revolution to the mid-1920s in France and beyond. Their book sheds unique light on G.I. Gurdjieff and on his teachings as a source of stability, purpose and vision. Over time, the teachings tend to drift off from circumstance to become abstract. The remedy is here. This tale must live and be told for many years to come. What I'm trying to do here at the Four Ideals, a bit about Thomas and Olga and the translators. Thomas de Hartmann, born 1885, died 1956, was born in the Ukraine and was already an acclaimed composer in St. Petersburg before he met Gurdjieff in December 1916. In 1906, he had married Olga Arkadievna de Schumacher, who became Gurdjieff's secretary during the crucial years when the Gurdjieff-de Hartmann music was composed, and Gurdjieff began his own major writings. De Hartmann had nearly finished the Russian draft of his book about the years spent with Gurdjieff when he died unexpectedly. Olga prepared an abridged translation of it and completed his work with an epilogue of her own. She herself died in 1979. The present edition has been fully revised and expanded by Thomas C. Daly and Thomas A. G. Daly from unpublished parts of the Russian manuscript of Thomas de Hartmann and from memoirs of Olga de Hartmann. Foreword. Of the many forms in which G.I. Gurdjieff embodied his teaching, three stand out as unique: his system of ideas, his movements, and his music. In each case, Gurdjieff worked with one particular pupil who had a special capacity to receive, absorb, and transmit to others the material given. In relation to the ideas, it was P.D. Uspensky, for the movements, Jean de Salzmann, and for the music, Thomas de Hartmann. All three of them and their spouses have been major transmitters of Gurdjieff's teaching, and they figure closely in this book, which spans 12 years, beginning in 1917. Oh, and excuse me, good evening, Jordan. Hello, Jordan. I hope you and your family are well, and you're looking forward to this. Thomas and Olga de Hartmann joined Gurdjieff in St. Petersburg just as the revolution was starting and followed him without a break through the growth of his institute, which began in Essentuki and Tiflis in the Caucasus, moved on to Constantinople and Berlin, and finally settled in the Prairie de Yvonne at Fontainebleau near Paris. There, Gurdjieff chose Olga de Hartmann to be his secretary, assistant, and manager of the household. She arranged much of the Prairie's business and translated for Gurdjieff at meetings with outsiders. It was also there that Gurdjieff began to work with Thomas de Hartmann on the composition of the remarkable collection of piano pieces that has come to be known as the Gurdjieff-de Hartmann music, and if you've never listened, you can find them on YouTube. I'd highly recommend them. The de Hartmanns left Gurdjieff in 1929 to live on their own and finally settled in Garches, where they stayed throughout World War II. They did not go back to Gurdjieff again, but they never wavered in their devotion to his teaching. And when Gurdjieff died in 1949, they joined forces with Jean de Salzmann, who inherited responsibility for all Gurdjieff's work. In 1951, the de Hartmanns moved to New York to give guidance to Gurdjieff's groups in America and to support Madame Uspensky and her pupils at her farm in New Jersey. In the same year, I myself met them for the first time, and they became my teachers. Thomas de Hartmann was already writing his book about the years he and Olga had spent with Gurdjieff, and I used to hear tantalizing fragments of the parts being worked on when I visited them in their New York apartment or at Madame Uspensky's farm, or when they came to Toronto, where they started the first Canadian group in 1953. In 1956, Thomas de Hartmann died unexpectedly, leaving the book unfinished. His widow, undaunted, continued to devote her first energies to the Gurdjieff work, among other things founding the group in Montreal that was to grow into the Gurdjieff Foundation of Canada. But as soon as she could, she turned again towards finishing her husband's book and finally was able, through Cooper Square, a New York publisher, to commission its English release in 1964 with an epilogue of her own to complete the story. The same edition was republished as part of the Penguin Metaphysical Library in 1972. When Olga de Hartmann died in 1979 at the age of 94, she left the copyright of the Gurdjieff de Hartmann music to her Montreal Foundation and the rest of her belongings to me personally. Among her voluminous archives, two compelling items stood out, needing immediate attention. Her husband's music notebooks of the Priory period, all handwritten in Russian, and her own memoirs written in English. To work with the music, we had to learn Russian, a slow but rewarding process in which my elder son, Tom, joined me, fascinated. Olga's memoirs, however, were immediately accessible to our curiosity. These proved insufficient for a separate publication, but they complemented her husband's words most fittingly. And since at that time the original book was virtually unobtainable, this was an ideal opportunity to combine their two accounts in a new edition, alternating their voices as they themselves did in real life when they spoke to us all on special occasions. And if you were with us on the old channel for Idiots in Paris, it's a similar thing. Thomas will speak, Olga will speak, or their voices, same like Elizabeth and John Bennett in Idiots in Paris. I edited the manuscript, a fairly simple interweaving of pages from the original book with the appropriate section of memoirs typed by my wife Ruth. The result was fine-tuned at a session with author-editor Jacob Needleman and family friend R.G. Colgrove, who had looked after Olga de Hartmann during her last years. That expanded edition was published by Harper and Row in 1983. By then, Tom and I had learned enough Russian to explore de Hartmann's original handwritten manuscript for his book, 300 closely packed pages of old-style lettering and spelling. We had always assumed that the published English text was a direct translation of what de Hartmann had written, but even a preliminary exploration showed some notable differences. It became increasingly evident that, having to commission and pay the full cost of the first edition out of her limited resources, Olga de Hartmann had had to abridge the text, omitting many smaller items and condensing many others. Retranslation, with the generous help of Svetlana Arnoldovna Rajowski, Russian teacher and singer who knew the de Hartmanns well, revealed a considerable body of valuable new material. It also showed that Thomas de Hartmann had a greater flair for character description, sense of storytelling, and clarity of time and place than had been apparent before. It was clear that a new and further expanded edition was called for, this time a much more ambitious and all-absorbing work. Tom now fully shared the editorial jobs and responsibilities, while Ruth, with equal devotion, began the long task of typing the many pages of and corrections to the text. Penguin Books was interested in publishing it and invited us to include as much new material as possible in this definitive edition. In complying with that request, we have introduced all the material that we feel is worthwhile, either in itself or as enhancing what was already there. These selected editions have increased the length of the book by about 1/3. As we assembled the new material with the old, we began to glimpse de Hartmann's grand but simple design, to follow and portray the evolution of Gurdjieff's work as it changed its outer form and dress, so to speak, depending on the conditions surrounding it and the nature of the people attracted by it and available to it. As we try to fit each new piece into its place in accordance with this vision, the material began to arrange itself into natural groupings, mainly in chronological order, with occasional references backwards or forwards in time. This led us to adopt a new format of 26 short chapters, one for each natural grouping, in place of the former 7 rather formless chapters and Olga de Hartmann's epilogue, which had no indicators to help one find one's bearing. To make up for this lack, we have introduced titles to let the reader know where each chapter is taking place or what the general content is, without, we hope, giving away any discoveries that are better arrived at in the course of reading. We have retained the practice of the previous edition in which, in the main text, Thomas de Hartmann's words appear in Roman type, while portions by Olga de Hartmann are set in italic. The new sections have been integrated in the same manner, with only minor editorial changes to smooth out links and eliminate duplication. We have updated the introductory material on Gurdjieff and Thomas de Hartmann and added a new section on Olga de Hartmann. All three sections are designed mainly to give some impression of the background and character of each person. For reference and study, we have provided new maps, a chronology and an index, as well as editor's notes about changes and corrections that have been made in the text itself. For those who like to experience the sound of their reading, hello, it would be well to consult the note on pronunciation of Russian names on page before starting the book. I could do some Russian homework to tune up my Russian pronunciation, certainly. If there is anything I regret about de Hartmann's texts, it is that he died just at the point where he was beginning to write about his musical collaboration with Gurdjieff. We can never know what more he intended to write about that, but happily the world will now be able to know, experience, and work with the music itself. B. Schotz Schon, the venerable German publishing house that printed first editions of such composers as Mozart, Beethoven, and Wagner in their own day, has published the definitive edition of the Gurdjieff de Hartmann music for piano. Those who wish to hear how de Hartmann himself played some of this music and, in one case, to hear the sound of his voice speaking about it, can obtain cassettes or compact discs. Meanwhile, in this book, one is privileged to hear the inner thoughts and feelings of both the de Hartmanns more extensively and completely than ever before concerning their life-expanding experiences with Gurdjieff and their fellow pupils. It is their heartfelt tribute to their teacher, thanking him in the best way they could by sharing with others the fruits of what they had come to understand through his work. So, a beautiful preface there, just letting us know, or foreword even, letting us know, and that was written by the translator Thomas C. Daly in December 1991, and again, you can only imagine to have been with Mr. Gurdjieff for 12 years, was it, they're saying? 12 years beginning in 1917, so early in Ouspensky's In Search of the Miraculous, they would likely have come onto the scene. Gurdjieff and Ouspensky were already forming a relationship and sharing the ideas. As Daly says, the ideas are best found in Ouspensky's writings, the movements with Jean de Salzmann, and the music with Thomas de Hartmann. And so I'd certainly recommend going and looking into those. But this is a chapter titled The Present Need, Introductory Note by Jacob Needleman. The authors of this book, now reprinted in its final and definitive form, met their teacher G.I. Gurdjieff at a time when Russia was disintegrating. Railroads still ran and citizens could still buy food and even matches, but the end was clearly in sight for Tsarist Russia. A time of such turmoil had hardly seemed an opportune moment for the introduction of a new teaching conveying fresh possibilities and equally serious demands. Yet Gurdjieff stated forthrightly that the period of great stress, uncertainty and danger they were then experiencing was the only time when real headway could be made. Did he mean that literally? Did he mean that only when the tectonic plates of an era shift radically can we find the interest, the need, and the requisite attention to work on ourselves? Or did he mean that only in the present moment, whatever the conditions, can we find the right time, the only time? He is not here to answer, and neither are the de Hartmanns, Olga and Thomas, who followed their teacher through and herein relate one of the great spiritual adventures of the 20th century. But we are here, and again the plates are shifting. Again we confront a present moment characterized by uncertainty, extraordinary stress and change. Again we encounter a sudden need to work, to examine ourselves in ways that transcend previous self-imposed and culturally imposed limits, in search of new openings within ourselves and in our mutual relations. This book offers a great deal in this present stage of our own individual journeys in this unexpected time. Our life with Mr. Gurdjieff conveys clear evidence of what so many of us seek: personal confirmation that there indeed is a path through the tangled contradictions that we individually and collectively feel. We sense that more is now needed from us and that more is possible. Gurdjieff tells us that first we must see the truth about the real state of our lives and our present level of being. The path that he illuminated entails as much unlearning as the learning of new skills and outlooks. With Gurdjieff's name now recognized widely throughout the West, his voice, heard clearly in this volume, calls to us with an immediacy and freshness that corresponds precisely to the unexpected sense of urgency that we all feel. The events narrated in this jointly authored book occurred 30 years before the Hartmanns began to write. Their writings were torn from them by a solemn recognition of the uniqueness of their experiences with Gurdjieff. After Gurdjieff's death in 1949, they understood their responsibility to those encountering Gurdjieff's teaching in a new era, one lacking the unique flavour of personal contact with him. What they recorded had to be told, even if they themselves felt reluctant to write. Thus they set themselves to work, motivated by the wish that, in the words of Thomas de Hartmann, you will not forget. Those reading or listening to our life with Mr. Gurdjieff for the first time may question aspects of the relationship between the de Hartmanns and Gurdjieff, both individually and as a couple. The methods Gurdjieff employed in order to bring a pupil to confront himself or herself, and the pattern of obedience, even of devotion, that the de Hartmanns convey in their attitudes towards Gurdjieff, strike unfamiliar chords for many modern readers. Some of Gurdjieff's means of instruction may seem unnecessarily severe or arbitrary. Reading about how Gurdjieff sent Thomas de Hartmann, an aristocrat, on a mission to sell skeins of silk thread in the manner of a common peddler, or his firmness in sending Olga de Hartmann on a dangerous voyage, can evoke a question in some readers. Why, they may ask, did Gurdjieff at times push his students so hard? A key ingredient is need. The de Hartmanns knew they needed what Gurdjieff offered, a way to confront, study, understand, and finally to transcend the forces that kept them from seeing who they truly were. These forces are within all of us, including the hypnotic action of assumptions, contradictions, and unnecessary limitations rooted in us by upbringing, education, and habitual patterns of daily existence. With penetrating vision grounded in his own inner work, Gurdjieff saw through such barriers. With a master's touch, he pushed each of his students through them. For some readers of this book, the concept of a master requires little explanation. However, for those who find notions of obedience contrary to modern ideas about individualism, some words are necessary. No explanation could address this question more cogently than the following paragraphs written by Jean de Salzman in a translator's note prefacing one of Gurdjieff's own books, Meetings with Remarkable Men. Quote, "The idea of master, so familiar in the East, is hardly accepted at all in the West. It calls to mind nothing definite. Its content is extremely vague, even suspect. According to traditional conceptions, the function of a master is not limited to the teaching of doctrines, but implies an actual incarnation of knowledge, thanks to which he can awaken other men and help them in their search simply by his presence. He is there to create conditions for an experience through which knowledge can be lived as fully as possible. This is the real key to the life of Gurdjieff. End quote. This is the key also to all of the demands and unique manifestations of love that Gurdjieff brought to the journey he shared with a most remarkable couple, Thomas and Olga de Hartmann, through each reader's efforts to listen to the echoes of both need and hope that this book evokes. The Hartmanns' experiences call us, in this time of crisis and danger, to an intensity of self-confrontation that is, and always has been, the very essence of being fully human. And now we have a series of chapters on Gurdjieff, on Thomas de Hartmann, and on Olga de Hartmann. And yeah, like I said, I think that'll be a good place to leave it, so that all of the introductory material is stands alone in this part 1, and then part 2 we can begin the book proper. And so now we will learn a bit about those, a short introductory note on those lives. On Gurdjieff, and here is a quote condensed from Meetings with Remarkable Men. So this is Gurdjieff's own words. My father was widely known as an Ashok, the name given everywhere in Asia and the Balkan Peninsula to the local bards who composed, recited or sang poems, songs, legends, folk tales and all sorts of stories. He was often invited to evening gatherings, to which many people who knew him came in order to hear his stories and songs. At these gatherings, he would recite one of the many legends or poems he knew according to the choice of those present, or he would render in song the dialogues between the different characters. The whole night would sometimes not be long enough for finishing a story, and the audience would meet again on the following evening. G.I. Gurdjieff. Georgy Ivanovich Gurdjieff was born of a Greek father and an Armenian mother in a region of Asia Minor that was a melting pot of nationalities and religions. He was the eldest of 6 children, with a brother and 4 sisters, one of whom died while still in her youth. During his childhood, the family lived in Alexandropol and Kars, both then in Armenia, but the date and even the place of his birth remain uncertain. His own writings are vague, ambiguous, and sometimes contradictory about this and other matters, as if he wished to turn attention away from himself as a person and toward the transmission of the knowledge he had collected. His introduction to the world of traditional wisdom, poetry, and music through his father's talent was rich and deeply impressive. Not only was this a constant influence absorbed at home, but during his childhood his father took him to several contests among Ashoks who came together from Persia, Turkey, the Caucasus, and Turkestan. At such events lasting weeks or even months, the contestants would improvise questions and answers in verse and song on religious and philosophical themes or on the meaning and origin of some well-known legend. In this most natural way, Gurdjieff was early experienced in the world of music, poetry, and philosophy, and inherited in great measure his father's alertness of mind, retentive memory, and love of the collected lore of ancient peoples. Wishing him to grow up free from squeamishness, repulsion, timidity, and fear, Gurdjieff's father took every opportunity during his childhood to inculcate in him an attitude of indifference to them. Another quote from Meetings with Remarkable Men, quote, "He would sometimes slip a frog, a worm, a mouse, or some other animal likely to evoke such impulses into my bed, and would make me take non-poisonous snakes in my hands, and even play with them. He always forced me to get up early in the morning and go to the fountain and splash myself all over with cold spring water, and afterwards to run about naked, and if I tried to resist he would never yield, and although he was very kind and loved me, he would punish me without mercy. I often remembered him for this in later years, and in these moments thanked him with all my being. If it had not been for this, I would never have been able to overcome all the obstacles and difficulties that I had to encounter later during my travels." End quote. The family moved to nearby Kars after Russia took it from Turkey in 1878. There, Gurdjieff was chosen to sing in the choir of the Russian Orthodox Cathedral. His strong, clear voice and exceptional mind came to the notice of Father Borsch, the cathedral dean, who assumed responsibility for Gurdjieff's further education and opened to him the world of science, including medicine, astronomy, and chemistry. Father Borsch wished to enable him to become a physician for the body and a confessor for the soul. With a far-ranging taste and thirst for knowledge, Gurdjieff set out at an early age on a search to understand for himself the sense and aim of man's existence. In company with several other like-minded men and women who called themselves the seekers of truth, he sought to gather knowledge, wherever the trial might lead, of ways whereby the highest could be developed in oneself. For this he had to find and gain access to many, sometimes secret schools of ancient wisdom throughout the Near East and beyond, as far as India and Tibet. Among the most notable of these was an Essene school reputed to have existed in the days of Jesus Christ. In the Islamic world he studied the methods of many orders of dervishes and penetrated to Mecca itself. To gain access to one monastery in Kafiristan, a country where recognizable foreigners were in danger of immediate death, he and his friend Skridlov, a professor of archaeology and fellow seeker of the truth, decided to find their way disguised as a Sayyid and a Persian dervish respectively. To perfect their roles, they spent a whole year letting their hair grow long and learning the necessary sacred chants, practices, and instructive sayings of former times. Little by little, through the teaching and practices of different schools, Gurdjieff found living answers to the questions that so deeply concerned him. In many of these schools, Gurdjieff also found sacred gymnastics, dances, rituals, and other forms of movement practice as a means of self-knowledge and self-development, the science of which was to become one of the chief pillars of his own teaching. Likewise, he studied the sacred music that emanated from such schools, and that sometimes had a power to touch and awaken the inner being and assist it to reach for contact with higher being. After some 20 years of search and collecting ancient wisdom from living sources, Gurdjieff began to shape a teaching of his own, designed to make such understanding more accessible to peoples of the West. In 1913, he appeared in Moscow and organized his own school there, later establishing it also in St. Petersburg and dividing his time between the two. He began to expound the system of ideas he had developed, the same truths of all time but interrelated in a single branching structure more easily comprehensible to minds trained in Western patterns. All the ideas are concentrated around a central one, the most complete evolution possible for humankind and for the individual. The universe is presented as an orderly organism whose functioning is based on the interplay of two fundamental laws, the law of seven, or the law of octaves, and the law of three, or the law of triads. The unity of the universe takes form in descending order of worlds within worlds, progressing like notes of a scale, from galaxies through star clusters and solar systems to planets and satellites. This descent branches into ever-increasing multiplicity, mechanicality, and limitation. Within this orderly system, each note of a larger octave branches into a whole inner octave, as white light, a note in the electromagnetic scale, branches into the colors of the rainbow. This universal image is not derived as a simile from music, but rather the reverse. Music is one form and expression of the basic universal laws. Such was the breadth and range of ideas and related practices that Thomas de Hartmann and his wife were confronted with when they met Gurdjieff in the winter of 1916 to 1917. What it did for them, they tell in their own words. In 1932, Gurdjieff closed the institute he had developed near Fontainebleau in France and travelled again for some time. In the mid-1930s, he returned to working with groups in Paris and continued throughout World War II and after. He died in Paris on the 29th of October 1949 and was buried at Avon, near the Château de Prairie. And so that's the introductory note on Mr. Gurdjieff. Again, if you've read Meetings with Remarkable Men and much of the biographical material, it may not be new to you, but again, it's very nice to have it set out. You can never hear it said too many times. You can never be too familiar with the life of Mr. Gurdjieff and his beginnings. And of course, Meetings with Remarkable Men is the place to go for that. The first 2 or 3 chapters are very autobiographical about his young life. So now we move on to On Thomas de Hartmann, and we begin with a quote from Thomas de Hartmann, quote, "For a long time I have known that our interior world is the soil in which the seeds of art take root. Without this seed in which the magic part of life is hidden and from which a work of art can be born, there is no art, there is no music." Thomas de Hartmann. And if you've never seen a picture of Thomas de Hartmann, there he is. Mr. de Hartmann. Thomas Alexandrovich de Hartmann was born in 1885 on the family estate which bordered on the village of Korushkevka, east of Kiev in the Ukraine. He showed his inclination for music at the age of 4 and liked to express himself by musical improvisations. Fairy tales haunted him from his childhood and were to become a recurring theme in his work. Perhaps influenced early by his German great-uncle Eduard von Hartmann, author of The Philosophy of the Unconscious, he had a deep longing for something unknown in ordinary life, a longing that never left him. His early memories were of growing up among cultured people, close to the land and surrounded by the peasants and craftsmen of old Russia. He was always grateful to have experienced the interdependence of life so close to nature, and to have known the spirit and style of living of these people, so well described, he said, by Chekhov. This happy base of life continued until he was 9, when the death of his father, who was a captain in the Imperial Household Guards, obliged his mother to enroll him as a boarding student in the military school in St. Petersburg, from which his father had graduated. There his special talent was soon recognized, and he was permitted to spend all his spare time on musical studies. He was only 11 when Anton Arensky accepted him as a pupil for harmony and composition, and Thomas continued to study with him until Arensky's death in 1906. It was at Arensky's that he first met Sergei Taneyev, with whom he later studied counterpoint. He also worked with Anna Esipova-Lechetevsky on piano technique. In 1903, Thomas received his diploma from the St. Petersburg Conservatory, then under the direction of Rimsky-Korsakov. In the same year, he graduated from military school as a junior guards officer, with years of active service ahead of him. Nonetheless, he found time to compose and to enter into the musical and theatrical life of St. Petersburg. The first notable public performance of his work took place in his graduation year, when he wrote the incidental music for the Imperial Theatre's production of the Dumas tragedy Caligula. He also wrote piano preludes and settings for songs of Russian poets, which were published by Jurgensen and Zimmermann. A year or two later, when Arensky was writing to Taneyev about de Hartmann, he commented, quote, Take note that at the end of his very first composition, a prelude in A-flat minor, published by Jurgensen, there are 5 or 6 notes that do not exist on any piano whatever. The keyboard would need to be extended about 7 inches to accommodate them. Now he knows his instrument better and plays it very well, but his attention is still inclined to wonder. End quote. Nevertheless, Thomas prospered under Arensky's tutelage. His most striking success was his ballet, The Scarlet Flower, premiered in 1907 by the Imperial Opera of St. Petersburg in the presence of Tsar Nicholas II, with Lagat, Pavlova, Karsavina, Fokin and Nijinsky in the cast. In the previous year, he had married Olga Arkadyevna de Schumacher, and he and his wife were happily surprised when, in recognition of his talent, the Tsar authorized Thomas's release from active service to the status of reserve officer so that he could devote his full time to music. This enabled him to fulfill his great wish to study conducting in Munich with Felix Mottl, a personal pupil of Wagner and musical director of the opera. From 1908 to 1912, the Hartmanns spent the main part of each year in Munich, where Thomas was deeply influenced in new directions. And I believe this is a quote from Thomas de Hartmann. To my great surprise, I took myself to account and began to realize that all that had attracted me in my youth, all that I had dearly loved in music, no longer satisfied me and was, so to say, outdated. At that moment, 2 events took place in Munich, and it was these which left a trace on my artistic path. The first was a great exhibition of paintings by Van Gogh, Gauguin, and Cézanne, at that time still completely unknown, and the second, soon afterwards, was my meeting with the Russian painters Yavlensky, Verevkina, and especially Kandinsky, with whom I remained friends until his death. End quote. The intensity and depth of this relationship and its meaning for his life is hinted at in a remark about Kandinsky by his wife Nina in later years. Quote, as far as I can remember, among all his circle of friends, there was only one whom he ever addressed by the familiar second-person singular, and only one who addressed him likewise, the Russian composer Thomas von Hartmann. Even with his closest painter friend, Paul Klee, Kandinsky, who was revolted by all excessive familiarity, kept always to the formal plural, even after several decades of deep friendship. End quote. In those years in Munich, Thomas wrote a choreographic suite, Daphnis, Narcissus, Orpheus and Dionysus, which was presented at the Odeon. Also at the Odeon, at Kandinsky's urging, Alexander Sakharov performed his newly created solo Danses Plastiques to music written for him by de Hartmann. During his last 2 years in Munich, Thomas planned and sketched the music for Kandinsky's experimental stage project, The Yellow Sound, which did not find a producer before war intervened. He was also an integral part of the avant-garde publication Der Blaue Reiter, The Blue Rider, edited by Kandinsky and Franz Marc, for which he wrote an article on anarchy in music. After the death of Thomas's mother, the de Hartmanns returned to St. Petersburg in 1912. With a fresh palette of his own, Thomas was busily occupied with new compositions when he met Gurdjieff in December 1916. He recognized at once in Gurdjieff the teacher who could bring him what he had been long searching for, a search shared by his wife. The two of them gave up their life of comfort and luxury to work with Gurdjieff and followed him wherever life took them for the next 12 years. In 1929, as with numerous other senior pupils, Gurdjieff made it necessary for the de Hartmanns to leave his institute and become completely self-dependent. Thomas made a living writing scores for commercial films under the pseudonym Thomas Cross, while he continued to compose his own works. He and Olga survived World War II in Garches near Paris. They lived in a deserted house because the Germans had occupied their own, but her piano was there, and inspired by Verlaine, Proust and James Joyce, Thomas set their works to music and also worked on his opera Ether. After the war, the Hartmanns began to have a lively and successful musical life in France, with performances of Thomas's songs, chamber works, concerti and symphonies in concert hall and on radio. They had begun a warm and close friendship with Pablo Casals, which promised many happy exchanges when another turn of fate uprooted them again. Gurdjieff died on the 29th of October 1949. The decision was taken with Jean de Salzman that the Hartmanns would move to America to support the work there. The last few years of Thomas's life were based mainly in New York. He organized the first private publications of selections from the Gurdjieff to Hartmann music and also issued a number of records of it played by himself. His work with groups did not slow his personal creative activities. An invitation from Frank Lloyd Wright brought Thomas to Wright's architectural school in Arizona, where he lectured to the students on the interrelatedness of the arts. His orchestral music was performed in several North American cities, and in New York he played his own sonatas on the radio. He died unexpectedly in 1956, a few days before an important concert of his music in Town Hall. The concert was not cancelled and fittingly celebrated his music and his life in memoriam. So although these are just short notes, commentaries on these lives, you get a big overview of the stature, I suppose, would be the word, of Thomas de Hartmann. He was a very famous and well-accomplished composer, and so was his wife, in similar circles. And it says here, the two of them gave up their life of comfort and luxury to work with Gurdjieff and followed him wherever life took them for the next 12 years. And there's every memoir and biography that you will read, even with Ouspensky had already written. Tertium Morganum was a sort of philosopher, metaphysician in his own right, and he left it to work with Gurdjieff. Alfred Arage was editor of a very famous popular magazine. He left that to go and be with Gurdjieff, and on and on and on. People would give up their lives to go and be with Mr. Gurdjieff, who they recognized as the one who had the answers, the one who could help them raise their being to awaken and wake up and be conscious. And one would argue that we have enough clues, enough bones to dig up in this modern day in order to do the same. And so now we have a short section on Olga de Hartmann, and here to begin is a quote from Olga de Hartmann, and I'll show you a picture of her. We were married in church with all the fuss of the time. The sister of the Tsar was present, and the church was filled with guards, officers, and high dignitaries. My vanity and pride helped me to choose the most handsome and tall best man, so as not to spoil my hair when he held the crown above my head, which was the custom, and to be careful not to step on my very long train. Olga de Hartmann, and there she is in 1921. Olga Arkadievna de Hartmann was born Olga de Schumacher on the 28th of August 1885 in St. Petersburg, where her father was a high government official. Both her parents were of German ancestry and the Lutheran faith in the Russian capital, where the court officially spoke French and the state religion was Russian Orthodox. From childhood until her marriage, Olga had a German nurse and a French governess, and by the time she was 6, she could speak and read Russian, German, and French, she recalled. Uh, and here's another quote from Olga de Hartmann. And hello there, Laurie. Laurie B. It's lovely to see you. The whole crew's back together. Oh, and hello there, Jorge. Some of the names, all the names have changed, so I can't recognize everyone. But hello there, Jorge, who says, wonderful community. It's lovely to see everyone, and welcome. We'll be back tomorrow with some more of the Hartmanns memoirs. And it's nice to see you, Laurie, and everyone. I hope you're all well and are enjoying these introductory pages. So this is Olga de Hartmann recalling, quote, from an early age, I always had a religious feeling. When I was 7, all the other children in our school were Russian Orthodox, but my brother and sisters and I had our religious lessons in German separately from the others. One day my mother told us sorrowfully that from now on a Russian priest had to teach us Holy Scripture in Russian, but I was unwilling for us to be separated in this way from my parents, so they finally decided to become Russian Orthodox also. Although her parents led a very active social life in high society, they gave a great deal of attention to the children. At the age of 12, Olga liked to play chess with her father when he came home from work. In their spacious apartment, one whole room was a library with books from floor to ceiling. There, in the evenings, her father would read aloud to them from Russian literature and sometimes from Goethe and Schiller in German. The family always spent the summer together at a property they had in Finland, inherited from an uncle who had been a great traveller. As they grew up, Olga's mother gave parties for the children and all their young friends. During these they played charades, danced, and improvised plays and operas. Their parents also took them often to the theatres and concerts, and to all the premieres of operas and ballets. It was during the intermission at a concert featuring Thomas de Hartmann's music that Olga was first introduced to him. I had a funny feeling when I met him, she wrote, as if I knew him from long ago. In fact, the threads of connection stretched further than she knew at that time. During the reign of Tsar Alexander II, there was a special commission in the government to organize the liberation of the serfs. The senior senator who replaced the Tsar at meetings in his absence was Olga's grandfather. Serving on the same commission was the General Secretary of the government, the grandfather of her future husband. Small world. From the time of their marriage, Olga shared in all her husband's activities. In the summer, they now went to Thomas's family estate in the Ukraine, where 2 of the younger servants, children of older family servants, became their personal attendants and returned with them to St. Petersburg, Marfusha as cook and lady's maid, and Ossip as butler. Olga and Thomas became the closest of friends with Sergei Taneyev, the great teacher of counterpoint. Olga had a lovely natural voice, and Taneyev advised her to take singing lessons from B. Corelli in Italy, which was arranged while she and Thomas were living in Munich, and for which they went to Naples for several months. Later, when Taneyev's opera trilogy, Orestea, was being produced in Moscow, Olga sang a leading part. She also took lessons from the concert singer Zoe Lodi in the repertoire of arias from Rigoletto, Lakshmi, La Traviata, and Madame Butterfly, and in a benefit performance of the Imperial Opera, she was chosen to sing Violetta in La Traviata. It was in Munich that the Hartmanns began to be interested in esoteric questions. Olga wrote, quote, at that time everyone was reading Blavatsky. One evening, with Kandinsky and some others, we decided to try running a plate with an arrow on it around the German alphabet, like a modern-day Ouija board. We asked it questions, expecting the plate to stop on letters which I had to write down and afterwards decipher. But nothing meaningful was spelled out. Someone suggested trying it in Russian. Again, we asked questions, and at once it became quite thrilling. A ghost told us her name, Musutsky, and that she had lived in the town of Ufa near the border of Siberia and was buried there. She asked us to pray for her and said that a cousin of hers, she began to spell his name S-H-A, but she was interrupted and got no further. Kandinsky decided to write to the priest in Ufa and ask him if he knew of anyone by the name she had given. In a month's time he had the priest answer. There were among his parishioners many Musutskis, but there was only one with a relative by the name of Shatov. We were really astonished. And yes, thanks, Laurie B. I hope so too, but I think that's less important than the community, like you say, and being here together with these amazing texts and trying to wake up. So I'm sure the subscribers and the views will take care of themselves in time. And all we can do is keep coming together for these wonderful books and ideas and concepts. And just a page to go now. The Hartmanns began to look for some interesting and knowledgeable person to throw light on their questions, and they continued their search when they returned to St. Petersburg. There they encountered various dubious groups, in one of which the leader sought to control the members by hypnotizing them. Thomas and Olga quickly left, together with another member of the group, Andrei Zakharov, who became their close friend. When war mobilization stationed the Hartmanns at Tsarskoye Selo, Olga was alone all day while Thomas was on military duty. With a friend, she occupied her time by organizing and equipping a building there as a residence and school for some 60 boys aged 10 to 15 whose fathers were also reserve soldiers. A benefit concert assisted by people from the Imperial Opera helped her to finance this project. It was at this time that Thomas was talking privately with Zakharov and meeting Gurdjieff for the first time. Their book picks up the story. The last chapter tells what she chose to write about the rest of their life together until Gurdjieff died in 1949. After her husband died in 1956, she continued tirelessly in her efforts to help supervise and support the development of Gurdjieff's work in North America. As time allowed, she also promoted performances of her husband's orchestral and piano works, culminating in an oratorio-style presentation of his opera Essa at Syracuse, New York in 1976. In later years, for health reasons, she moved to Namb, near Santa Fe in New Mexico, where she died in 1979. And that, my friends, is where we will leave it for this evening. It's been lovely to see some familiar faces and old friends of the Old Book Club channel. And as I said, the app is still available. You'll find it in the description. There's many wonderful books and readings without any waffling or any digressions, just the pure text if that's what you like. If not, if you enjoy the waffles and the texts and the ramblings and the gulping, then you can come back. You're in the right place. Like I say, I have many great ideas that I want to share and speak about the four ideals, religious unification and all these things. Perhaps in the new year I'll really get to work on those, but for now it's been really great. Like I say, that's just the introductory material, so it was quite riveting, just those introductory pages. And tomorrow, as I say, we'll get into the meat of the words from Thomas and Olga de Hartmann. You're very welcome, Laurie. It's lovely to see you, and everyone else. Voldemar, hope you're there still listening too and are getting something out of it. And of course, everyone else. I am very much looking forward to continuing with this text. I'll continue to upload the perennial philosophy In Search of the Miraculous, and we'll continue reading Maurice Nicol's commentaries. So that's a feast of Gurdjieff ideas and his life and works in person. But for now, I'll say thanks again for joining. Good night. Look after yourselves. Have a great week if I don't see you. But we'll be back tomorrow at the same time for part 2. Take care, guys. See you then.